Hello, I'm John Grom, and welcome to our 118th Right and Left Discussion Forum. We hold our televised discussions twice monthly to demonstrate the value of civil, productive, open-minded political dialogue. This will be the third time in 5 years that we discuss the topic of gun violence in one form or another. Today we'll try to make sense of why this problem persists and that our schools are particularly vulnerable. Today's panel, beginning on my left, is Dr. Ronald Chamberlin, retired senior research chemist. On his left is Bryan Laubaugh, president of R&B Financial Services. On his left is Patty Haskins, a retired math teacher and member of the Wadsworth City Council. On her left, joining us for the very first time, is Scott McCormick. Scott is also a retired math teacher from Copley High School. Ron, I know that you've been dying to discuss this for a long time. So, in the last 50 years, we've had 17 mass killings in the U.S. for a total of 386 deaths. Of the 17 mass shootings, 4 have taken place in public schools. Now remember, a mass shooting is 5 or more deaths. Okay. There have been a ton of school shootings everywhere from an accidental discharge of a weapon to less than 5 killings. In addition to more thorough background checks, our president is calling for arming school personnel. How would you begin to tackle this problem?
It is a problem. It's a huge problem with many aspects. I don't think anybody, least of all me, has a solution to all of it. I do have some suggestions, however. I have some comments about the president. Increased background checks. I think we have to plug some of the holes that are there. We also need a universal database, and we need the ability to get into that database and to put the information in there so that everybody, all law enforcement agencies and so forth, have access to it. That isn't true at this time. Arming teachers is a terrible idea. Can you imagine what happens if we have a hallway full of frightened school children, and a gunman is on one end and a couple of armed teachers on the other, and they're engaging in a shootout? Come on now. Even armed guards in the schools are
is it any worse than one guy engaging in a shootout?
Doesn't matter how many. And can you imagine if you're the black teacher with your gun in your hand when a SWAT team arrives?
Oh my, no. Yeah, we talked about that.
So there's that. I have a couple of suggestions here. We are looking at, as you pointed out in the past, and is absolutely true, there are way more pistols in this country than there are assault-type weapons, however you call them, and let's not get caught up in semantics here. Mm-hmm. These rapid-fire weapons with large capacity magazines and so on. And shall we ban them all? Well, we had at least a partial ban on Tommy guns and sawed-off shotguns back in the 20s and 30s. Still do, although I understand, and somebody schooled me on this, that you can still get one, you just have to pay a hefty tax fee to get one. Mm-hmm.
Or buy one from your neighbor.
Nobody knows. Yeah, but you don't hear much about people going out and murdering lots of people with a Tommy gun anymore.
Oh, the guy in Las Vegas did. That was a not fully automatic weapon because he had
the bump stock.
The bump stock, but it's not a Tommy gun. It's not.
Well,
an assault weapon.
Did the same thing.
We need to ban those, and it is of interest here that Dick's Sporting Goods has just agreed to take these off. They don't have them in their stores, but apparently they own a chain of stores called the Field and Stream stores, and they're taking them out of that. And
they're taking what out?
Assault rifles, AK-15s, whatever. They're not going to sell them anymore.
What are they, Scott?
AR-15s or AK-47s or a number of other models.
All of those.
Similar nature.
All of those, yeah. As I say, don't get messed up with the semantics.
Okay. I just saw something briefly about Dick's, but I didn't realize that's what it was.
I actually read his letter. It's been published. It's quite heartfelt.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's one thing. Sales and trade. Try to get private transactions, gun shows, get those covered. Do we need a buyback? Do we need confiscation? Well, I'm not for confiscation.
You're not?
No, I'm not. I'm enough of a patriot. I do respect the Second
But
Amendment.
what are you going to do? There are 300 million guns
I
out
know.
there in
I
civilian
know.
hands.
They're not like Australia. They're able to do that. They got them by the truckload, but still. Yeah, I respect the Second Amendment, although I do think it's misinterpreted under modern conditions. Okay, background checks, universal database. We need that. Private sales, gun shows, and things like into the more in the pistol area. I think reciprocal carry laws are a bad idea. I have seen statistics, and I don't know the veracity of them, but correlations where the states with the strictest gun laws have the least number of gun deaths. And that's pretty clear.
Illinois?
That's pretty clear. Most states, most of them, that's pretty clear. Geez, I was in Texas, in Dallas. It was Dallas, Texas, 40 years ago. People carrying guns on the street, you know.
Yeah.
Open carry.
So, on the other hand of this, on the assault weapons, this case in Texas at the church, the fellow went in and killed him, and a neighbor came out with his assault rifle and engaged in fire and wounded the guy. But he wasn't a good guy with a gun inside the massacre scene. The fellow was outside already. The numbers of good guys with guns who have stopped mass shootings has been zero. So that's Wing LaPierre, I think, has problems. The mental health issue. The president wants to, I don't know what he means by this or what his specifics might be, but that's kind of a red herring. From what I know about mental health, and I've had some study with this, folks who are depressed, bipolar people, when they're depressed, they tend to shoot and kill themselves. They don't kill other people. People with schizophrenic, well, they'll pick up the weapon of choice. Usually they hurt a loved one. I did know a lady who came to our meeting at NAMI one time and said her son had tried to kill her that night and picked up a kitchen knife. The weapon of choice. I suppose a schizophrenic who hears voices in his head might want to go out and kill a bunch of people, but it's pretty rare, I think.
Okay. So bottom line, what do you think would be the most effective measure we could take right now to reduce danger in schools?
Reduce dangers in schools. I think guards on the outside, metal detectors.
Okay. All right.
Probably for any physical means. This has to do it.
Bryan, as an old Army brat, what do you think?
Well, Ron brings up a lot of good points. I think initially, if you look at our own school system, there is a school resource officer. He's a policeman. He's trained. He is armed. I doubt very seriously if he would stay outside the school. If we're going to use this latest mass shooting as any example, I think that that officer would engage that person that if they made it into the school. I don't know if you've tried to get into the school lately. It's very hard. There's a variety of things you have to go through. I went up to buy tickets for a basketball game and then a football game, and you have to go through a series of checkpoints to get into school. I think that's a great start. I think one of the issues that we have is that, and I've talked about this before, and there are some other articles that have come out. We have a population of boys that have grown up in fatherless homes. And this young man that perpetrated this terrible shooting down in Florida came from a fatherless home. His adopted father had passed away, his mother had passed away, and he had no real bearings in life. He had no anchor in life. He was able to go out, and unfortunately, because of the system that's in place, and I agree 100% with Ron, the system, we need to tighten that up. Our law enforcement agencies need to be able to communicate with each other. Wherever you're at on the spectrum, it's pretty clear that there were anywhere from 20 to 40 times that the local law enforcement had visited his home for complaints. The low end is somewhere 20 that they're admitting to. The high end is 40 some, which the New York Times and CNN has delved into their records and said that the sheriff's department was out at his home in excess of 35 or 40 times.
Yeah.
The FBI had been contacted twice. A neighbor had turned him in. He called himself and said, I'm not well. There has to be something in place where this young man would have been red flagged or visited or given, a little special attention, instead of going down to Dick's and buying a shotgun earlier, and that's why I think
That's what he did, yeah.
Dick's bought a shotgun. On the Dick's thing, there's a lot of virtue signaling going on now in business. Dick's gun sales have been going down dramatically over the last several years. I don't know of anybody, to be honest with you, that goes to Dick's. I have a concealed carry license. I've gone to a variety of tactical classes to help me and keep my training up. I don't carry most of the time. I collect some weapons and guns. My kids understand that they're not toys. They're maintained. They're safe. They're trigger locked. I mean, if it would take me a little while to get to it, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
The point that I think we're missing here is that this problem has been going on now, and we're now seeing some of the consequences of a failed notion that young men can grow up without a father in the home.
Yeah.
And there's a great article that's out. It has a lot of third-party information. It's not just cherry-picked information, and we don't need to go through the statistics and all that kind of stuff. But we're seeing some of that right now, and we can get into the numbers as far as how many people are shot with an assault type of a weapon or all that kind of stuff. But this is a problem that we really need to delve into and solve it in the long term. But initially, right now, I think we have to harden up maybe the schools a little bit. A school resource officer, identifying these kids that get on social media and start making threats. There was a young lady up in Rochester that's sort of going through the system a little bit. She made some threats on social media, and we can solve this. It doesn't have to end up like a Florida situation.
That would be interesting to find out how we're going to solve it. But
Yeah.
I want to get into the implementation and the fatherless home thing before we're in the next 15 minutes. But Patty, what do you have on your mind?
Well, first of all, I believe that young man, while he did not have a mother or father, he did have people a man and a woman that were taking care
Only
of him.
for a short period of time.
But he did have a figure in there. There are many things that you need to look at. I agree with Ron that the idea of arming teachers is not, in my mind, is not a good idea for numerous reasons, one being the crossfire. I mean, just yesterday a teacher in Georgia brought a weapon into the school and fired it in the school and was then arrested.
You probably haven't conducted a survey, but have you ever talked to a teacher that was in favor of carrying a firearm?
I haven't personally, but not being in this classroom right now, it's not that I see 10, 20 teachers a day to discuss it, but I've never talked to one that was in favor of it. The unfortunate part with all of the discussion on this is nothing has been done up till now. Every time there has been a mass shooting, no matter what the type or where it is located, the first thing is we're not going to discuss it now, it's too soon. And then later on, nothing is done. And when actions are tried, nothing is done in Congress. And I think you need to have things done on a federal level, not on a state level, for them to be effective. I say this in, you mentioned Chicago and Illinois and the gun problem there. Chicago has one of the toughest gun rules in the country, and yet they have such a high crime rate, but that's because you only have to drive about 5 miles and you can buy a gun legally. So it's not effective unless it's done across the nation. The things that they're looking at now, this is not a one thing fix everything. I do think we need to encourage the guards at the schools, possibly having metal detectors to get into the schools. That can be of a big cost, and there needs to be governmental help with paying for that cost. I know at the old high school, I think I counted up at least 15 doors into that school. So, and you can't lock them from the inside, or chain them up. That's against, fire codes. But anybody could let anybody in. So you'd have to have a guard at every single one of those doors, which would be difficult. I think that it is a good idea that people under the age of 21 can't buy an AR-15 in Florida. You can buy you have to wait till 21 to buy a pistol, but you can buy an AR-15 at 18, and I think that is extremely dangerous.
But you can't buy cigarettes.
Right. I think, very honestly, I see no reason that anybody should be able to buy an AR-15.
No.
I have real concerns with that. I don't know the purpose of it. Maybe it's fun to shoot, but considering the danger, I've real problem with that. Background checks.
Cut down spare trees on your property.
Yeah, background checks. Obviously, the gun show loophole needs to be closed. I think, the problem with background checks, in some cases, there have been shootings with a rifle that was purchased legally by the parents, and then the child that was mentally ill had access to
Sandy
it.
Hook.
Yes, exactly. And those, you can't, you need to limit anybody, if anybody is living there has access to that gun. We do have to look at mental issues and mental health. The budget has been cut for mental health within the country, providing less and less help for those people. One of the first executive orders that the president passed was there was a ruling in place that people that were on, I think, Medicare or Social Security, if they had a mental issue, because they weren't allowed to buy guns. He said, no, they should be allowed to buy guns, and change that. Okay, if you're mentally ill and need to be on disability because of that.
Are you talking about the executive order that Obama signed saying that anybody who was receiving benefits from Social Security for a mental illness could not buy a gun?
Right.
That's the order that was never implemented.
But then Trump.
Yes.
Well, the ACLU came out against that.
Yeah, but I disagree with that. I think that if there's,
anybody who is treated for any.
If you are mentally ill.
But a mental illness covers a lot of things.
I understand that.
Like obesity. I mean, you have to.
I'm not sure mental illness covers obesity, but
there's a long list of things that are very, very harmless.
But I think we need to tighten that up.
Okay.
So, you look at all of these things. What is the president going to do? I don't know. I heard him speak yesterday at that forum where number one, he said we should confiscate guns and then do due process, which was a really interesting statement from a Republican president.
Well, he's going for the Bernie supporters. Come on.
Who knows? He talked about the age limit. He talked about mental health. He talked about arming people in schools. But he talked about all of these restrictions and then accused Pat Toomey of being afraid of the NRA. Of course, a few days earlier when he spoke at CPAC, he didn't mention anything about restricting any gun law. So where the man stands, I don't know.
Okay. I assume, Scotty, that you're not going to continue this attack on Trump. So, but as a former teacher and a gun hobbyist, I have a question for you. Okay. It would take you by surprise here. Maybe you don't know the answer. Is there a loophole exception?
For?
Excuse me, a gun show loophole?
Well, it's not a loophole. It's all totally legal, but you can have people in a gun show that are firearms dealers. They have to follow the federal protocol of background checks. But if a private individual has a booth at a gun show, he's private. He doesn't have to follow the federal protocols. There was a piece on Channel 8 last night, I believe, about this. They were looking into the Cuyahoga Fairground gun show, and they had two aspects, that being one, and the other one was being able to purchase a firearm before you even go in to the event in the parking lot. And to forestall that from happening, they have signs up that there are no buying or selling allowed in the parking lot. And it's not being adhered to very strictly. And of course, you'd have to have somebody out there monitoring that the whole time, which is pretty much impossible. One thing I would like to comment on, I mean, you've all hit some very good things. Metal detectors are probably a good idea. Resource officers, but how many and in what buildings? Are you going to have one in each elementary, a couple in a middle school, 3 or 4 in a high school to cover all entrances and exits. Gets to be a pricey issue. Talked about fatherless homes and the lack of a male figure in people's lives.
Which is a characteristic of practically every school shooting.
Yeah.
26 of the last 27.
Yeah, there was one that.
But one thing I'd like to add to that is the total desensitivity of the public on killing. I mean, all media. We make issues, we blow things out of proportion in the newsprint. Look at some of your TV programs like The Walking Dead. You can't go 5 minutes without somebody shooting somebody in the head or chopping their head off. And I believe you get desensitized. Video games, the same thing. So when the price of a human life is so devaluated, I wonder if people really understand that shooting somebody is a permanent situation and a life-changing. You can't just reset it later. I don't know, but I think that the price of life has become awfully cheap.
You know, he brings up a very good point, and this is where you get the pushback and the scoffing from the entertainment industry.
Yes.
When you have pumped over the last 25 years this particular type of video games, the way they treat women, you go to a movie now and they treat guns, you know, people get shot in a video game, they get back up again. And they laugh at that. They think that's funny. And you know, there are studies that are coming out now that it does actually rewire some of these particular individuals' brains. Now, maybe it doesn't Ron, maybe it doesn't me because we're older, but you get these kids that have had a steady diet of this, and they think a little bit differently, and they're more apt to lash out in ways that we probably wouldn't.
Yeah.
I don't know. When I was 10 years old, I went to the movies. I went to the shoot 'em up cowboy movies every Saturday afternoon for a dime. One of my father's possession was a pearl-handled cap gun with a holster that I kept well oiled up and went out shooting around the neighborhood.
Right.
Yeah, but what you did, you shot somebody else in the gun.
But the
You didn't
difference,
shoot him in the chest.
the big difference is when the kid sits down and does 4 hours of Call of Duty, or he's online with his friends playing these games. We didn't grow up with a steady diet of video games that basically have a tendency to rewire some of those important things. So, you know, if we want to look, we got to look at the whole picture, and not just, okay, we're gonna take this off and that's going to solve the problem. It's not going to solve the problem.
Before we run out of time, I wanted to cover the topic of implementation. Yeah, it seems like after every gun shooting, an investigation shows there's been a failure to reinforce a law or a protocol that's already been established. And I'm wondering how you hold and who you hold responsible for implementing all these great ideas. The gun store clerk is responsible for the background check. Is he on a commission? Is the background check going to get in the way of his getting a paycheck?
You know, here, and maybe Scotty can talk about this. When you go to buy a gun, and I have purchased guns, it's not a walk-in and 5 minutes later you're walking.
Not anymore.
Yeah. So he can, you know, I don't want to take up any time, but this notion that somehow you can walk in and walk out, it's just not happening.
However, on the Channel 8 News last night, they did have a producer go in to buy a handgun, did a little negotiating for a few minutes, and he purchased a handgun that they had no intentions of keeping. They were turning it over to the police, but he showed how easy it was to get one from a non-firearms dealer, just a private individual. They haggled, fine. He came back after he got his cash, and he needed to see his driver's license just to prove he was an in-state resident. That was it. That was it. So in some cases, it is easy to buy a firearm depending on where you're buying it. But as you said, a firearms dealer or a gun shop, you go in, you're going to be there a while because there's an extensive form, and it's gotten more extensive over the last 3 or 4 years.
Well, how did this happen? This was an Ohio gun shop that you're talking about?
No, this was a gun show, at the
Gun show.
Berea, Cuyahoga
okay.
County Fairgrounds that they had undercover cameras. And
Okay,
they
was
showed
it a gun dealer who sold a...
No, it was a private individual
Okay.
that sold.
That's the problem.
Gun
with
dealers
shows.
follow the letter of the law. They have to. They
Yeah.
have to. They don't have any choices in this. And one other gentleman was interviewed about, it costs money to do these background checks. So you can't obviously expect somebody to do that if they're a private individual. They don't even have the resources maybe to do it. So if you want to call it a loophole, it's a loophole, but it is the law.
But the seller has the responsibility of covering the cost of the background check?
If he's a
seller
federal
does?
firearms
Right.
licensed dealer.
He does.
Yes,
Yeah.
but if he's an individual,
Yeah.
if I wanted to sell you a firearm, I wouldn't have to do any background check. All I'd have to do is take your cash and really see your driver's license at your same state that I'm in, and we're good.
But look at how many failures to properly implement laws that happened in the Florida case. I mean, here's the
But that doesn't mean not
FBI.
to do anything, though.
I
You
understand.
have to,
I understand.
yeah.
I understand that. But what I'm saying is that we should be paying as much attention and putting enough enough resources behind implementation. It's easy for a politician to say
Right.
he votes for a certain gun law.
I think that there have been enough in all of these shootings. There have been so many red flags that have just been ignored, and this latest one, I just can't imagine that no one ever thought we better pull this kid off the street and talk with him a little bit. Let's get him some help. You look at in most of those mass shootings, there were red flags going up all over the place, and they
Yes.
were ignored. So mental health,
My case.
firearms, implementation of screenings and stuff, I'm all for that.
As Patty says, it's going to take an overall effort, a
Right.
federally based effort to try to coordinate all this stuff and to get it in place. I mean, with today's computers, you can sure do it.
I'm telling
as long as
you.
you put the data in.
We could
And I've said
probably
this before, the NSA, if they want to know who you are, trust me, they'll find out who you are.
We could probably have a whole program on who should be passing these laws, the states or the Fed. The Fed's got a lot of laws that are they're routinely ignored. I don't know. Some states, even some local municipalities, have gun laws, don't they? Does Wadsworth have any gun laws?
Not that I know
Not
of.
allowed to in Ohio right now.
No, you have
Really?
to follow
Yeah.
the federal
Well,
protocol.
wasn't there a city in Ohio, though, that just passed a weapons ban?
And I think it was voted down.
Was it
Okay,
down?
well, we'll
It
talk
was
about it some other time. Thank you very much, Scott, for joining us. I'd love to see you again.
Perhaps.
Okay. Thank you.